Egypt's long history is also a history of confrontations and bloody wars. The empire's relations to its neighbors are characterized by competition and conflict, yet also by diplomacy and cooperation.
Egypt is the hub of the world. As such, it must be defended. Whoever is for us is a friend. Whoever is against us must be fought.
What role do wars play in the empire of the pharaohs? In 1923, archaeologists make a unique discovery not far from Luxor, in the inhospitable mountains of Deir el-Bahari. They find hundreds of bones scattered on the floor of a widely ramified tunnel system. Archaeologist Salima Ikram has long been studying the puzzling find. Who were these people? What had caused their death? And what's behind the way they were buried?
When this tomb was found, they went in and discovered that it was filled with bodies. And when they started to examine these mummies, they found that they actually had lots of injuries, as if they had died in battle. So the conclusion was that this was a mass grave of warriors that had been gathered up from the battlefield and then buried here.
The grave is more than 4,000 years old. After analyzing the bones, Salima Ikram concludes that there are about 60 dead buried in the tunnel, all of them male and between 20 and 40 years old at the time of their death.
The wounds that these people had suffered were extraordinary. You could see that there were examples of, blunt force trauma, as if they had been hit with a mace. These people had been stabbed with knives, with swords, and suffered a great deal, and maybe even axes. And what was really quite horrible was that some of them were found, and it looked as if they had been lying on the battlefield and birds of prey had come and pecked at them and ripped at their flesh.
The bodies were taken to the cave and given an honorable burial. They are wrapped in linen cloths, a precious item in ancient Egypt. Later, the tomb was looted, and the remains were carelessly scattered on the ground. Yet, who were the dead?
Some people think that this tomb was right at the cusp between the New Kingdom and the Second Intermediate Period, and therefore these warriors would have been people who had been fighting against the Hyksos and making sure that the Egyptians, true Egyptians, could rule Egypt again.
The Hyksos are invaders from the east. Around 1550 BC, the Egyptians succeed in driving them out, so perhaps the tomb dates from the time of this struggle.
What is really touching is that this is perhaps one of the first, if not the first, war grave in history. It is really a testament to the Egyptians, their armies, and also how they treated their soldiers.
There's war even at the dawn of Egyptian history, under the reign of King Narmer. He wants to conquer the Nile Delta in the north. In the Egyptians' view of the world, the north is at the bottom, since this is where the Nile flows into the sea. For us, an unusual perspective. Back then, Egypt is divided into two territories. Narmer rules over Upper Egypt. His goal is to subdue the principalities of the Delta in the north, not least because of the important trade routes leading from there to Palestine and Syria. Narmer raises a small army, probably only a few hundred men, and attacks Lower Egypt. Relics such as the so-called Hunter's Palette give a detailed picture of what the warriors looked like in Narmer's time and what weapons they used. The overall image is quite different from our perception of ancient Egypt.
In modern times, Egypt is often portrayed as inherently peaceful. But if we take a closer look at texts, pictorial evidence, and archaeological finds, we have to acknowledge that war and violence played a significant role in ancient Egypt.
In battle, soldiers fight with clubs, daggers and spears, or their bare hands. Bound prisoners are led away. The fallen enemies are left to the vultures. Close combat weapons show the evolution of Egyptian warcraft. During the early period, the mace is the weapon of choice, until it's replaced by various types of battle axes during the Old and the Middle Kingdom. During the New Kingdom, swords become ever more present. The most famous variant is the sickle-like khopesh. Yet for a long time, the most effective weapon is the bow. Narmer groups several archers into units and thus concentrates their fighting power. He's considered one of the first commanders to create an organized army. And his new tactics win him battles, as is testified by a unique object, the Narmer palette. It shows the king as a triumphant warlord. Narmer is shown about to slay a prisoner with a club. Or is there another message underneath this image?
On the Narmer palette, King Narmer is represented holding the mace from the middle of the shaft. In this position, he would not be able to give a deadly blow to his foe. And we may not forget that the prisoner in front of him was a compatriot. So this was a gesture that should threaten, and it was not intended for the kill.
It's a demonstration of power that goes down in Egyptian history as the ritualistic slaying of the enemies. Over time, variations emerge. In his raised hand, the pharaoh holds a club, or sometimes a sword or a spear, while with his other hand, he grabs one or even an entire bundle of vanquished enemies by the scruff of the neck. It's a gesture of absolute dominance that becomes a trademark of the ruler, with a clear message: don't mess with the pharaoh. King Narmer's show of force finally leads to success. Around 3000 BC, he succeeds in uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. It's the first nation-state in history. Egypt's first capital is built at the intersection of the two halves of the empire, Memphis, called the Scales of the Two Countries. It's the most important strategical point in Egypt. It's also the headquarters of the army, the guarantor of Egypt's strength and unity. From now on, the world beyond Egypt is divided into friend and foe. Narmer's politics are successful. Over the next 3,000 years, the empire endures. Unification is followed by recovery. During the Old Kingdom, Egypt experiences a period of economic power, and culture flourishes. Its most visible expression, the mighty pyramids of Giza. The most famous pyramid is built by Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops. Yet he's not just a great builder. Khufu also sends expeditions to neighboring areas. His men are to procure rare pigments, which the pharaoh intends to use for the decoration of his new buildings. Local scouts help find the way through the endless Libyan desert. For this important task, Khufu uses his best men, his soldiers.
For the Egyptians, the army was not used only for warfare. In fact, it is like modern Egypt, where you will have armies building roads, digging canals, making bridges, going on expeditions. So for ancient Egypt, the army might go to get gold, or it might go to get stone, or it might go to explore for geological things or where people are. So all of these expeditions were also things that the army did in addition to providing useful services.
The Egyptians developed sophisticated logistics to provision such expeditions. However, camels that can go for weeks without water do not yet exist in Egypt. Instead, donkey caravans are sent ahead. They deposit water supplies every 70 kilometers. Thus, an expedition will have water without being slowed down by the heavily loaded donkeys. The remains of these water depots can still be found in Egypt today. One of the destinations of the Khufu expeditions is the Dakhla oasis in the Libyan desert, more than 350 kilometers from the Nile. It serves as a base camp for surveys into the surrounding countryside. The region around Dakhla is rich with deposits of red sandstone containing iron oxide, from which color pigments can be extracted. Impatiently, Khufu awaits the raw material he needs for his architectural visions. His soldiers have completed their task. They bring back the precious color pigments by the basketful. Trade expeditions remain of high importance to the Pharaonic Empire.
These expeditions are a very important part of the Egyptian economy. The logistics must have been enormous. There were often hundreds or thousands of men sent out into inhospitable regions, into the desert or across the Red Sea to Punt.
Alas, where Punt was located is no longer known. Temple reliefs record an expedition to the legendary land of incense. On ocean-going ships, the Egyptians set out on the long journey. Their merchants load live animals onto the ships, and even myrrh bushes in pots. The precious cargo is protected by soldiers. Expeditions are sent in all directions, deep into the western deserts and to the shores of the Red Sea. They also regularly go to Sinai, where copper and turquoise are extracted. Most often, however, the pharaoh's men travel up the Nile to the south, where they suspect great riches in fabled Nubia. Near the southern border of the empire, close to the city of Aswan, lies the island of Elephantine. It's the starting point for expeditions to the neighboring country. However, relations between Egypt and Nubia are checkered. Yet Egyptians regularly head south in search of rare goods. Their curiosity about the mysterious land from which the Nile flows to them is boundless, and Nubians are highly esteemed as trading partners.
In times of peace, the Egyptians had constant trade relations with their neighbors, and interaction was certainly on an equal footing. The Egyptians were particularly interested in luxury products and exotic objects from neighboring societies, and they even imitated them.
Nubia is important to the Egyptians because it's a hub for transshipping goods from all over Africa. From here, rare oils, ivory, ebony, and strange animals reach the Egyptian homeland. But above all, gold, the element of the gods. Egypt itself has no large gold deposits. Nubia, on the other hand, has rich mines. It's also called the gold land of the pharaohs. The pharaohs acquired the precious metal either by trade or by sending their soldiers to mine it directly in the Nubian deposits. It's probably gold from Nubia with which Khufu has the top of his great pyramid covered. "500 years after the founding of the Egyptian Empire, the Kerma culture emerges in Nubia. It develops into a major military power. the Nubian warriors eventually become a threat to Egypt.
The king as a warrior was basically keeping the foreigners at bay and keeping Egypt's boundaries safe. And the foreigners are representative of chaos. They're not Egyptian, and they want Egypt. That is a chaotic thing to do, and therefore they have to be controlled.
The Nubians are one of the three arch-enemies threatening the Egyptian empire. In the south, Nubian attackers can use the Nile as an advance route for invasion. In the west, the Libyans pose a constant threat. From the desert, they threaten the Nile Delta. Northeastern Egypt, on the other hand, is a gateway for invaders from Asia, for Hyksos, Hittites, Assyrians, and Persians. Yet it's not foreign invaders, but throne disputes and civil wars that lead to the fall of the Old Kingdom. Around 2170 BC, the first intermediate period begins. It lasts 150 years until the era of the Middle Kingdom begins. Egypt regains its old strength. Pharaohs like Senusret III pay special attention to the defenses of their empire. Along the border with Nubia, their new strategy becomes apparent. Giant fortresses signal to any stranger, from here on, not one step further. With the construction of each new fortress, the Egyptian empire pushes further south. In the end, it's a chain of 17 massive bulwarks. They're meant to keep the southern neighbors at bay and secure access to the Nubian gold mines.
We know an entire chain of fortresses in the Nubian area, and we assume that they were built mainly to control the Nubian gold deposits in the eastern desert. At the same time, these fortresses were a suitable base for armies intended to advance further south.
After the fall of ancient Egypt, the ruins of the forts along the Nile remain for millennia. Yet, following the construction of the Aswan Dam in the 1960s, the former fortifications disappear forever, flooded by the artificial reservoir. But not before they're examined in detail by archaeologists. Thus, it's possible to reconstruct the appearance and the function of these structures. All Egyptian fortresses are built along the same lines. Yet the architects of the pharaohs know how to adapt each structure to conditions on site. The fortresses are surrounded by walls up to 10 meters thick and 15 meters high. There are no blind spots. No matter where attackers charge, the archers of the fortress can shower them with a hail of arrows. There are additional fortifications for the gate areas, the weak points of any fortress. Behind the walls are the quarters for officers and troops, as well as administrative buildings, temples, warehouses, and workshops. Since all fortresses have access to water, their garrisons can survive for a long time under siege. Yet, who are the men on duty in these fortifications? A wooden model from the Middle Kingdom shows a troop of Egyptian spearmen. The pharaoh's army mainly relies on professional soldiers, yet there's a considerable number of conscripts too. Basic training is harsh. First, the recruits' heads are shaven. Then the soldiers-to-be are drilled and trained in the use of their weapons. Physical training is a must. Wrestling is supposed to teach the recruits to stand their ground. Those who don't follow the rules risk a beating. a group of Nubian archers. Enlisting warriors from the neighboring countries as mercenaries is a common part of Egyptian rule.
Officially, foreigners were viewed with condescension. To Egyptians, especially those at the royal court, Egypt was the center of the world. In practice, however, things were quite different. Recent research shows that ancient Egyptian society was highly diverse, and a good many foreigners even made careers.
This also applies to the army. Yet it's doubtful whether service in a fortress will boost promotion. As soldiers report on papyri, daily life is monotonous. At least there's no lack of food. Off-duty, board games are a favorite pastime. There's no room for toilets in the barracks. The men have to make do with sand-filled bowls. So many soldiers must be counting the days until they're allowed to go home.
Duty in a fortress meant life in a very confined space in a very inhospitable area far from home. If you're a simple soldier, you're crammed into 38 to maybe 42 square meters with 8 to 10 comrades. That's certainly a hard life. If you are a commander or a senior officer, then even if your fortress may be comparatively small, you'd still have a large building and all amenities at your disposal.
Archaeological evidence shows there's a huge difference in the Egyptian army between a small elite of officers and the enlisted men. Written sources, nearly 4,000 years old, tell us what daily life was like in the fortresses. The Semna dispatches. They're accounts of Egyptian patrols in Nubia. From their fort, the soldiers move into the surrounding countryside of the Semna Gorge for reconnaissance, checking everyone they come across. The patrols keep a special eye on Nubian traders who want to enter Egyptian territory. Only those holding a permit are allowed across the border into the empire. The fortresses on the edge of the Egyptian world are meant to uphold order, not just against armed enemies, but also against the supposed chaos of the outside world. The Egyptians also marked their territory with stelae made of stone. For a long time, this border system works. Yet around 1800 BC, the Middle Kingdom collapses, its defenses crumble. Egypt lies open to foreign invaders and learns its lesson.
A professional army really started to arise in the New Kingdom after the Egyptians experienced the Hyksos, invaders from the northeast who took over the northeast delta and then basically dominated much of northern Egypt. Hyksos, called the rulers of foreign countries. They had chariotry, they had special weaponry, and so in the New Kingdom, a class of specialist warriors grew up, and then you had more of a professional standing army.
The professionalization of the army is backed up by a massive build-up in weaponry. The era of the legendary warrior pharaohs begins. Enter Thutmose III of the 18th dynasty.
You had pharaohs like Thutmose III, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, creating the empire to its greatest extent. They did so because they were able to learn that military technology.
Thutmose relies heavily on the wonder weapon of his time, the chariot. The Egyptians adapted it from the Hyksos. Yet, even if they didn't invent it, they excel at continuously improving its characteristics.
The Egyptians were never particularly innovative in terms of technology, but they were quick to react. The moment they met an enemy with a new weapon, such as the Near Eastern composite bow, the Egyptians would immediately copy it. The same goes for chariots. Then it was the pharaoh's job to create the appropriate logistics, expertise, and infrastructure to implement these new weapons and combat techniques.
How the Egyptians optimized the construction of chariots is known thanks to Tutankhamun's treasure. A total of 6 chariots were found in the king's tomb. Among them, the pharaoh's ceremonial chariot. Although the gilded and richly decorated vehicle is unfit for battle, it shows the construction of an Egyptian chariot down to the smallest detail. The frame is made of curved timbers. Its large track width carries the chariot safely through turns. 6 spokes provide stability for the wheels, which are covered with cattle intestines as a kind of ancient tire. The contraption is held together by wooden connectors and leather cords. Thus, it can be easily disassembled and transported.
The
Egyptian chariot was an absolute high-tech product for its time. Chariots were of great importance throughout the New Kingdom and revolutionized warfare. Egyptian troops were known to emerge at high speed, shoot their arrows, and then retreat to the side or the rear on their chariots.
Thutmose has his troops train hard with a new war machine. The Egyptian chariot combines high mobility with the range of bow and arrow, making it the most feared weapon on the battlefield for a long time. For the pharaoh, his newly established chariot corps becomes an instrument of imperial power politics. In 1457 BC, he's determined to make the most of his new weapon. The Egyptian Empire has extended its borders far to the east. But the princes of the Levant want to shake off foreign rule and rally against Egypt. Thutmose moves against the center of the revolt, the mountain fortress of Megiddo. A huge army rolls 250 kilometers to the east, 12,000 warriors and their retinues. It takes them a good 2 weeks to march through scorching deserts and rugged valleys. Then they reach their destination. Megiddo, a fortified city on a hill, and a place of utmost importance.
Who controls Megiddo controls the Jezreel Valley, and who controls the Jezreel Valley controls the whole region. That's why this was crucially important for the Egyptian army at the time of Thutmose III to get control of the city of Megiddo.
Just one obstacle lies between the city and the Egyptian army: the Carmel Mountains. Pharaoh Thutmose wants to lead his army through a narrow pass. His officers advise against it. They think it's too risky and would rather bypass the mountain. But Thutmose sticks to his plan. Why does he take this risk? The answer is found here, in the sacred precinct of Thebes. In the Temple of Karnak, Thutmose III has immortalized his war diary in stone, propagating his view of events and even explaining why he dismissed the advice of his officers the day before the battle.
There he states, "No, I will go through the narrow pathway. I will not appear weak or cowardly in front of the enemy." Thutmose III is giving a clear signal to his enemies of strength and boldness. At the same time, he is encouraging his own troops.
As the army sets out, everyone knows that if they are attacked in the narrow pass, they will be lost. Yet Thutmose's move pays off. No attack develops. There's nothing left to protect the rebels from the wrath of the pharaoh. The next day, the attack on the camp of the unsuspecting enemy begins. At the head of his chariots, Thutmose charges against them. He strikes quickly and hard. 1,000 chariots are said to have been in the inventory of the Egyptian army. The rebels are put to flight, but they're not yet defeated. Since, during the first attack, only 83 enemies are killed. So the war diary records. The rebels entrench themselves in Megiddo. A month-long siege begins. A team of archaeologists tries to find out why the defenders are able to hold on for so long. They dig their way back in time, layer by layer, to the era of the warrior pharaoh Thutmose III. With each new discovery, excavator Israel Finkelstein can reconstruct the appearance of the former city ever more precisely. Even the smallest shards of clay help to solve the riddle of Megiddo.
So here we are lower. There was a palace in a certain part of the city. We know where the gate was. We know where the temple was. So the two most important components of a city like this, their location is well known. And then we know that there was no major fortification surrounding the site, but houses built connected to each other and forming some sort of a belt of houses which gave protection to the people inside.
So the city was well fortified. Thanks to a tunnel system, even supplies could be maintained. 70 meters deep, it leads through the rocks under the city to the fresh water springs of Megiddo. Yet after 7 months, Thutmose succeeds in conquering the city. Whether Megiddo is taken by storm or falls as the result of treason remains an open question. The rebels must expect the worst. Back then, there's no Geneva Convention.
In times of war, the Egyptians were not squeamish in treating their prisoners. At best, they were deported to Egypt to do forced labor.
Yet Thutmose has other plans for the rebels.
Thutmose III uses a new policy towards his enemies that will continue to be used afterwards in ancient Egypt. He makes the enemies promise not to attack or to rebel against Egypt again, and he forces them to pay taxes and tributes to Egypt.
So the pharaoh spares the lives of the subjugated. Relentlessness in war and moderation in peace. With this two-sided strategy, the Napoleon of Egypt restores order. A balanced policy of war and peace ensures the stability of the Egyptian empire. Yet 200 years after the victory of Megiddo, another pharaoh must again set out to the east to fight off the enemy. Ramses II, easily Egypt's most famous ruler. In 1274 BC, he assembles the largest force yet seen in Egypt and prepares for battle at Kadesh. Ramses spares no effort to increase the striking power of his army, as is evident at Ramesses. The city founded by Ramses is a center for arms production, with a focus on chariot troops.
In the city, there was a great number of military facilities, as our excavations have shown. There are stables for the horses of the chariots, but also a kind of drill yard for charioteers, as well as workshops, which are certainly related to the production of things needed by the military.
The royal stables of Ramesses are a unique discovery in the history of Egypt. The facilities can accommodate up to 500 horses. In large halls, they're groomed and cared for. Archaeologists find hoof prints more than 3,000 years old. The complex shows that Ramses is making a gigantic effort to preserve the Egyptian empire.
Pyramessa
replaced Memphis as the capital for about 200 years. We know for sure that Ramses II ruled from here for much of his reign.
The eminence of the military in the new city is shown by a detail on this temple stele. The pharaoh rewards a soldier for his faithful service. He awards him the so-called Gold of Honor.
It's from Pyramessa that Ramses II marched to the Battle of Kadesh.
Unlike Thutmose III, Ramses is not dealing with an alliance of rebellious petty princes. He's up against one of the great powers of antiquity, the empire of the Hittites. They dominate large parts of Asia Minor from their capital, Hattusha. From here, they rule over numerous vassal states. Now the Hittites want to expand their empire to the west at the expense of Egypt. The Hittites too use chariots, yet unlike the Egyptian version, their chariot is manned by 3 men. In addition to the driver and the archer, there's a fighter for close combat. Thus equipped, the army of the Hittites intends to challenge Egypt's rule over the Levant. Ramses sets out with his entire force to meet the threat. In the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, a fragment of a relief shows foot soldiers and chariots. It was found in the burial chamber of a general serving under Ramses II.
In the new kingdom, Egypt will reach its largest extent, the borders in the area of Syro-Palestina and beyond. You can see here a fortress and troops marching towards the northeast. Also, troops marching towards Kadesh would have started marching from this place.
The army is shown crossing a body of water where crocodiles lurk. It's possibly the easternmost branch of the Nile, beyond which the fertile land ends. It's here that Ramses plans to fight the invaders.
Some Egyptologists described it as the world's first world war, where they each had about 20,000 people, and the Egyptians had all the different tribes, the Libyans, the Nubians, and so on, allied with them.
The Allies reinforced the Egyptian infantry, which is equipped with shields and new weapons, such as the sickle sword. 4,000 foot soldiers, supplemented by chariot troops, are organized as a coherent combat unit. The Egyptian army consists of 4 such units, each bearing the name of a deity. Each unit marches separately toward Kadesh. It's what the Hittites have been waiting for. With their chariots, they pounce on the flanks of the unit named after the god Ra. The Egyptians, completely surprised, are put to flight. Then the Hittites charge toward the camp of the Armon unit, commanded by Ramses himself. A fierce battle begins. Then the Egyptians face total defeat. Yet, at the last moment, reinforcements arrive. The Egyptian chariots gain the upper hand. Now it's the Hittites who flee in panic, pursued by Ramses and his troops. Many are killed before the fighting ends. The Egyptian army has been able to hold its own on the battlefield. Yet its high losses rule out the conquest of Kadesh. Ramses has clearly failed to achieve what he set out to do. Yet defeat, or even a draw, is no option for a son of the gods. Ramses is a past master of propaganda. After his return to Egypt, he has himself celebrated as the undisputed victor, depicting the near disaster on the battlefield as a triumph. Ramses has his view of the events chiseled into the walls of 6 temples, leaving a total of 13 versions of the Battle of Kadesh. Like his ancestors, Ramses presents himself as all triumphant. Yet, there's one more twist to the story.
The Battle of Kadesh is one of the most exciting battles we know from ancient Egypt. It is completely different in the way it is depicted. Unlike all other battles, not only those of Ramses the Great, but also those of other kings. Because it shows the king in a dangerous situation. Usually the king stands on his chariot and nothing can touch him. He immediately fends off all enemies. For the first time, we see a pharaoh facing annihilation with the chariots of the enemies appearing behind him.
According to Ramses' propaganda, his troops have abandoned him. He seems lost. Only thanks to the help of the god Amun does he turn defeat into victory.
That's something that we don't know from earlier depictions or any texts in ancient Egypt. So here's a challenge to the king. He's in mortal danger, and yet he overcomes it with the divine assistance of Amun.
Yet Ramses II doesn't leave it at that. He enters diplomatic contact with the Hittites. 16 years after the battle, the pharaoh makes peace with the former enemies. Envoys from Hattusha bring a document to Egypt, the first surviving peace treaty in history. It stipulates that both sides will not attack each other and will even support each other in case of danger.
You know, the peace treaty with the Hittites does show you that the Egyptian pharaoh could be practical. Supposedly he's an incarnation of the sun god, he's all-powerful, there's nobody more powerful than him. But when it became necessary, he made a treaty. He made a compromise with his Hittite adversaries. So yes, I mean, all this Egyptian ideology had to deal with reality on an international scale at this point.
The United Nations still refers to mankind's first known peace treaty. A replica of the document hangs at the entrance to the UN Security Council in New York, reminding the leaders of the world to maintain peace between their nations. As Ramses does after the Battle of Kadesh. He will keep peace for the rest of his reign, 61 years after all. He concentrates on grandiose building projects instead. Yet with the reign of Ramses II, the empire is approaching its zenith. Some 100 years after Ramses II, Ramses III goes down in Egypt's history as the last great pharaoh. The new ruler wants to link himself to the glory of his predecessor. Alas, times have changed. Egypt is on the defensive. In the south, the Nubians are pushing northward against the Nile fortresses. In the west, Libyan nomad warriors attack the border. The greatest danger, however, comes from the sea. Around 1180 BC, the so-called Sea Peoples appear in the eastern Mediterranean as if out of nowhere. With their mighty fleets, they land on the coasts and ravage one city after another. They even destroy the Hittite Empire. To this day, the origin of the Sea Peoples is one of the greatest mysteries of antiquity.
The Sea Peoples were a terrible danger that attacked not just Egypt, but large parts of the Mediterranean. And we are not entirely sure as to who they were, but it seems that they were really an agglomeration, a group of different peoples, whether they were from Sardinia or here or there or everywhere. But they were seafarers, they were adept at naval warfare, and they were terrorizing the Mediterranean world.
Ramses III must mobilize all his forces if he wants to spare Egypt the fate of the Hittite Empire. To fight the Sea Peoples, he relies not only on his army, but also on Egypt's fleet. The pharaoh awaits the ships of the Sea Peoples in the north of his empire. He intends to use his own fleet to confront and destroy them in the Nile Delta. For the Egyptian army, navigation has been of the utmost importance since its beginnings. Ships are the most important means of transportation. On the Nile, troops can be quickly transported from one front to another, yet ships can also fight. The classic type has a crescent-shaped hull with raised ends at the bow and the stern, as well as a mast for a rectangular sail. For travel upstream, the ships have additional rudders, making them fast and maneuverable. Ramses III gathers everything that floats in the Nile Delta. The pharaoh intends to lure the foreign invaders into a trap. To this end, he's ordered Egyptian archers to take up positions along the banks of the river. The fleet and the army intend to overwhelm the ships of the Sea Peoples in a coordinated operation by killing their crews. It's the greatest mobilization in Egypt's history. The empire is in danger as never before. It's threatened with complete destruction. As a monument to the battle, Ramses III has a huge temple built, Medinet Habu, near Thebes. The war against the Sea Peoples is immortalized on the northern wall of the temple, with obvious references to a predecessor.
Ramses III undoubtedly uses the giant battle paintings of Ramses II as a model, but he implements them differently. Because it's about a sea battle, other than the Battle of Kadesh or similar events, what's striking is that he too uses the outer wall of the temple for the narrative.
On the banks of the Nile, the army's archers move into position. The warriors of the Sea Peoples do not seem to have long-range weapons. The task of the Egyptian fleet is to deprive the invaders' ships of their maneuverability and push them landwards. There, they become easy targets for the Egyptian archers. The foreign warriors are caught in a crossfire from sea and from land, with fatal consequences. The Sea Peoples are defeated, the invasion is stopped. Ramses can rightly claim to be the savior of Egypt. The outer wall of Medinet Habu is reserved for the official version of Ramses' battle and his victory over the foreign invaders. Yet inside the temple, there are other reliefs of the battle which seem to have been intended for the pharaoh's inner circle.
If you then go into the temple, there are representations similar to those from earlier rulers, where generals appear before the king and tell him, "I have defeated so-and-so many people." Then they hand over proof, and this could be a cut-off hand or a cut-off penis.
In the temple at Medinet Habu, the perspective of the victors is immortalized in stone. The perspective of the opposing side is unknown to this day. After his victory, Ramses III continues to rule for 25 years. The triumph over the Sea Peoples turns him into a legend. However, the country has spent itself in the defensive wars against the invaders. With Ramses III, Egypt's last great warrior pharaoh passes away. His death is the prelude to the slow, inexorable decline of the empire. Ancient Egypt views itself as the center of the world. It endured over 3 millennia thanks to a clever strategy of war and peace.
For an Egyptian king, both fortitude and diplomacy were crucial.
In war, Egypt's armies fight with no holds barred. In times of peace, its civilization flourishes.